My friend took me to a haunted campground. We weren't alone out there. I didn't go out there because I believed in ghosts. I went because my friend did, and because he'd been texting me for a week, straight like a kid trying to convince his mom to buy a new game. Dude, it's not just some abandoned campground, he said, tapping the steering wheel with one hand while the other held his phone up like he was presenting evidence in court. People swear it's haunted. People swear everything is haunted, I told him. My aunt thinks the microwave is possessed because it beeps twice. He laughed, but it wasn't his normal laugh. He had that wired excitement behind it, the kind he got when he'd been doom-scrolling conspiracy threads we were. On a narrow 2-lane road with trees packed tight on both sides, the sun was already low enough that the light through the branches looked stretched and thin like someone smeared gold paint across glass. He had insisted we go late because, quote, it's only creepy if it's near dark, which is how you know a guy dosing. He actually believe he's going to get hurt. If he did, he'd want noon and a crowd and cell service. What's the name again? I asked. He hesitated. It's not really on the signs anymore. That's comforting. He rolled his eyes. It used to be a youth camp. Then it became a park-run campground. Then they shut it down. Why, budget vandals, whatever. He shrugged, but he was still smiling. Also, listen, there was that hiker that went missing last month off the trail near it. I stared at him. You're just now mentioning that it's the whole point, he said, like it was obvious. People online are saying they heard crying out there, like real crying, and the park says it's probably coyotes, which is what they always say. So you read a forum post and decided to become a volunteer search party. Not a search party, he said quickly. Just looking, seeing if it's true. I watched the tree line whip past every now and then. A reflective post would flash in our headlights, like an eye. And the missing hiker, I asked, they found anything? A backpack, footprints, a phone. He shook his head. No, just gone. The article said he stepped off trail for a bathroom break and didn't come back. That's not a horror story. I said, that's a guy who got lost and died. He glanced at me, offended. You always do that. You always make it boring. Boring is how you survive. He made a noise like that, skewed, turned off onto a gravel road. And the car started rattling like it had suddenly remembered it was made of parts. No service bars. My phone went to SOS and stayed there. He didn't notice, or pretended not to. A broken wooden sign appeared in the headlights, half swallowed by vines. The lettering was faded, like the sun had licked it blank. I could just make out camp before the rest disappeared. We drove past an old entrance gate hanging open on one hinge. It feels like we're trespassing. I said, it's public land, he replied. Immediately, too, rehearsed. It's just closed. There's a difference. He parked in a dirt turnaround that used to be an actual lot. There were potholes deep enough to hide in. Grass grew up through the cracked asphalt like veins. We got out, both of us doing that automatic pause people do when they step into real quiet. The air smelled like wet leaves and old wood. Somewhere deeper in the trees, something tapped branch on branch, or something walking. He slung his backpack on, flashed his phone flashlight like a weapon, and grinned at me. All right, he said, you ready to get haunted? I wasn't, but I followed him anyway. The campground wasn't just abandoned. It was left behind cabins with broken windows and peeled paint sat in rows. Like teeth, picnic tables were tipped on their sides, half sunk into mud. A dead fire ring filled with wet ash looked like a mouth. There were old bulletin boards with warped plexiglass, the paper inside still visible in places, faded camp rules maps. A schedule of activities from years ago. It looked like the place had stopped mid-sentence and never started again. He walked ahead like he owned it. I walked behind, scanning, without meaning, to tree-lined cabin corners, anywhere something could be. Watching C, he whispered like whispering, made it more real. This is perfect. Perfect for tetanus. I muttered. He snorted. We moved deeper, following an old gravel path. It had been a loop once, but now it was just a scar in the ground. The woods were reclaiming it in slow bites. Then I saw the first thing that made my skin tighten. A strip of cloth caught on a low branch. Not old camp gear, not a faded flag, or a torn tarp. It was newer dark fabric, like a sleeve. I stopped and stared what he called. From a few steps ahead, I pointed that he walked back, leaned in, and frowned. Could be trash. He said it's not sun-bleached. It's not old. He reached for it, then stopped like he remembered. He wasn't supposed to touch evidence. Maybe someone camped here recently, he said, but his voice didn't have the same bounce now. We kept going. The cloth stayed in my head like a bad taste. The farther in we went, the more the place felt staged, not in a movie way, in a wrong way, like the trees were arranged to hide things, like every open space had too many blind corners. He kept talking to fill the silence. That's what he does when he's nervous. Joke stories, anything to keep the air from getting heavy. You know what the thread said, he whispered. It said if you stand by the old mess hall and listen, you can hear kids crying. Kids crying where, I asked. Into the void. He elbowed me. Don't ruin it. We came to a cluster of buildings at the center, a larger cabin that might have been the office. A long, low structure with a collapsed roof, and bizarrely a small schoolhouse. I stopped a school, I said. Here? Yeah, he said, pleased. I was impressed. They did classes during the summer, like wilderness education, or whatever. The schoolhouse was broken, in a way that didn't feel accidental. One whole side was caved in, like something heavy had leaned its shoulder into it. Boards hung loose. The window frames were empty mouths. We stepped up to it, and he nudged the door, which creaked open like it hated us. Inside, the air was colder, not cool cold like the building held onto shade as a substance. There were desks piled in a corner, a chalkboard with smeared writing so faint it looked like the ghost of a sentence. Someone had spray painted something on the wall years ago, but the paint had run with rain until it looked like dripping veins. Okay, I said, this is legitimately creepy. He grinned triumphant. Told you. We took a break just outside the schoolhouse, where the ground was flatter. He pulled a water bottle out, took a long drink, then immediately pulled out his phone. Pictures, he said, for proof. For woof of what? That we're idiots. He ignored me, angled his phone, and snapped a few shots with the flash. The light made the dark woods behind. US looked like a cardboard backdrop. Stand there, he said, by the door. Hold your light like you're investigating. I sighed, but did it because I'm not immune to being the guy in the photo. He took another shot, laughed, and checked the screen. Then, his smile faltered. What? I asked. Nothing, he said too fast. Show me. He hesitated, then handed me the phone. The picture was normal at first glance. Me standing by the broken door, flashlight in hand, face caught mid-annoyance, but behind me, deeper in the woods where the flash didn't fully reach, there were two pale dots, perfectly round, evenly spaced, not reflective like a deer's eyes, not shimmering, just two little white points floating in the darkness, like someone had stuck pins through a black sheet. My stomach dropped. That's a raccoon, he said immediately, too loudly. They do that. A raccoon is down low. I said those are higher. He laughed, forcing it. He took the phone back like he didn't want me holding it too long, like staring. And it might make it real. We should have left then. If I'm honest, I wanted to. I had that gut heaviness, the one that says go home even if your brain can't explain why. But he was already moving again, dragging me with his momentum. That's his gift. He can make you feel stupid for being cautious. We walked past the schoolhouse and into the heart of the old campground. There were trails branching off, some marked by dead wooden signs, some just faint impressions in the ground. Where's the mess hall? I asked. He pointed to the long, low building with the collapsed roof. But as we got closer, the smell changed. Not rot, not mildew, something sharper, like old meat left in a cooler too long. He didn't seem to notice, or pretended not to. We stepped into the mess hall through a gap in the wall, where boards had fallen away. The roof sagged overhead, like it was holding its breath. Inside there were long tables flipped and broken. The kitchen area was gutted, appliances missing tile. Ripped up the floor was littered with debris and other things. Clothing. More clothing. A sock. A ripped flannel. A pair of jeans tangled around a chair leg, like someone had stepped out of them mid-stride. My friend's voice went quieter. "Okay," he said. And for the first time, he sounded like he actually believed himself. "That's not normal." I didn't answer. I was listening, because under the noise of our footsteps and the creak of the building, I thought I heard something else. A sound like wet. Breathing, not in the room, in the walls. I turned my flashlight, slowly sweeping the beam across the corners. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted its weight the moment my light passed over it, like you look away from a shadow and it changes shape. We got out of the mess hall fast. Outside, the light was lower now, sunset creeping in. The sky beyond the trees had that bruised purple tint. That's when we heard the crying. At first it was so faint I thought it was wind or a bird doing a weird call. Then it sharpened, a human sob, a woman, maybe breath. Catching on each sound like she was trying not to make noise and failing. My friend's eyes widened. "Dude," he whispered like he was thrilled. I grabbed his sleeve. "Stop," he froze, looking at me like I'd slapped him. That's what they said." He murmured. "The thread said," "I don't care what the thread said," I cut in. "That's either someone hurt, or someone messing with us, or an animal that sounds human. Either way, we don't go toward it." He looked past me into the trees. The crying stopped. Silence snapped into place like a lid. Then, somewhere farther out, there was a scream. Not the earlier kind of scream you imagine in scary stories. This one was pain. It cut off too fast, like a switch. My friend went pale. "You heard that right," he said. "Yeah," I whispered. He swallowed hard. "We should go." I didn't argue. We started back the way we came, faster, now trying not to let it turn into a run, because running makes you loud and stupid. That's when I saw the hand. It wasn't in the open. It was half hidden behind the trunk of a pine, fingers wrapped around the bark, like someone peeking around a doorframe. Except the fingers were too long, and the nails, if they were nails, caught the last of the daylight and looked like dull bone claws. I stopped dead. My friend took 2 more steps before he noticed I wasn't beside him anymore. What he said annoyed, then saw my face and followed my gaze. The hand was gone. The tree was just a tree again. My friend forced a laugh that sounded like his throat didn't agree with it. "Okay," he said. That's probably a branch. Or there were fingers." He opened his mouth, then closed it. We kept moving, only now every tree felt like it had something behind it we were about halfway back to. The schoolhouse, when the path dipped slightly, and the trees opened up into a small clearing. And there it was, a deer. At first glance, it looked normal enough, standing in the clearing, head tilted slightly, ears forward. Then my brain caught up. It was too thin. Not just winter thin, starved thin, ribs visible under patchy fur. Skin stretched tight over the bones like shrink wrap. Its legs looked wrong, too long, spindly joints, seeming just a little too high. It stood perfectly still, watching us. My friend let out a nervous breath and tried to recover his vibe, tried to make it a joke again. "Look at this guy," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Bro looks like he owes money." I couldn't help it. Part of me laughed, because humor is a pressure valve. Deer took a slow step toward us. I noticed its coat wasn't brown the way it should have been. In the fading light, it looked pale grayish, like the color had been drained out and replaced with something dead. "Okay," my friend said, and now the joke was gone. That's not healthy. The deer's head tilted, and it did something that made my stomach turn over. It smiled. Not a deer expression. Not that weird lip curl animals do. A smile that belonged to something that understood what a smile meant. My friend whispered what the deer lifted its head, and for a second, the angle of its jaw showed something that didn't fit skin, that wasn't deer skin. Pale, almost gray, and then it stepped closer, and I saw it clearly enough that my brain tried to reject it. Under the deer's face beneath the muzzle, where shadow should have been, there was a human face, not attached like a mask someone wore, not dangling like a trophy. It was embedded like a deer's skull had grown around it. Pale, skin pulled tight, lips cracked, eyes half-lidded like it was asleep. But when it opened its mouth, the human face moved too, like they were sharing the same throat. My friend made a sound like he was trying not to throw up. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." The deer took another step, close enough now that I could smell it. That same sharp, sick smell from the mess hall, like meat turned sour. I backed up slowly. My friend did too. The deer's ears twitched, and it lowered its head like it was going to charge. And because my friend was still trying to be a person in a situation that didn't allow it, he did the dumbest thing possible. He pointed at it and said, voice shaky but loud, "Hey, get out of here." The deer froze, the human face under it opened. Its eyes, and I swear to you, it looked directly at my friend. The deer's mouth opened. The sound that came out wasn't a deer noise. It was a voice. A woman's voice, ragged and thin. "Help me." My friend's face twisted like every protective instinct he was waking up at once. He took a step forward. Without thinking, I grabbed his arm. No, the deer's head jerked sharply, like it didn't like being ignored. And it moved, not like an animal, like something that had been waiting for permission. It lunged, but not at my friend. I barely had time to throw my arm up before something hit me with the force of a car crash. I felt claws not imagined, now real, rake across my forearm, tearing through fabric and skin. Pain flashed hot, immediate, and my flashlight flew out of my hand, tumbling into the dirt. I fell hard onto my back. The air punched out of me. The world tilted, trees and sky spinning. I tried to scramble up, but the deer was already on top of me. Only it wasn't a deer anymore. Its body twisted in a way that didn't make sense, like its spine had too many joints, like it could fold itself into shapes animals can't. The human face under its muzzle opened its mouth, wider than a human mouth should be able to open, and the voice that came out changed. It became my friend's voice. "Dude, come on, help me." My friend froze. I saw it happen in real time, his brain trying to process his own voice coming from that. And that hesitation was all it needed. The thing lifted one hoof, except it wasn't a hoof. The end of its leg split and spread like fingers tipped with dark, blunt nails, and slammed it down the side. My head like it was pinning me, like it knew exactly how to keep me from moving. Then it turned on my friend. My friend shouted my name and rushed forward like an idiot hero, swinging his backpack like it was a weapon. The creature didn't flinch. It snapped its head down and bit him. Not a deer bite, not a nip, a full mouth clamp on his shoulder that lifted him off his feet. I heard his bones make a sound I still hear when it's quiet. He screamed, and the scream turned into choking wet panic. He shook him once, like a dog with a toy. Then it threw him. He hit the ground, hard rolled, tried to get up, and the creature was already on him again. I forced myself to move. My arm burned, blood slicked down my wrist. My fingers felt numb, like my hand didn't belong to me anymore. I crawled toward my flashlight and grabbed it with my good hand being wobbling wildly as I aimed it at them. The light hit the creature's side, and I got the long look. I didn't want. Its body was deer-shaped, but wrong in every detail. Emaciated ribs under sparse fur, pale gray skin, stretched tight like it was wearing its own body as a costume. Along its flank, patches of skin looked almost human, smooth, hairless, too pale. And the face, that human face under the deer's muzzle, wasn't a dead thing stitched on. It was alive. The eyes rolled, the mouth worked, lips trembling like it was trying to speak separately. It looked terrified. It looked trapped. Then it smiled again, and the smile wasn't the trapped faces. It was the creature's. Something deeper behind it, something wearing that face like bait. My friend was on the ground trying to crawl away, leaving a dark smear in the dirt. He looked at me, eyes wide, panicked, turning into pure pleading. "Run," he gasped. The creature lifted its head and stared at me. For a second we locked eyes, and I understood something without knowing how. I knew it had been following us the whole time. The clothes weren't random. They were a trail, a way to keep us moving deeper, a way to keep us curious, to keep us from turning back too soon. The crying, the screams, the voices, all of it was a leash. The creature let out a sound that wasn't a screech, not yet, more like a breathy laugh in a throat that didn't know how to laugh. Then it stepped toward me. I did the only thing I could think of. I shoved the flashlight beam straight into its face and screamed, not at it, just screamed raw and animal, like volume could become force. The creature recoiled for half a second head, jerking back the human face under it, blinking rapidly, like it hated the light. That half second was enough. I got up. I ran. I didn't pick a direction. I just ran toward where I thought the schoolhouse was, because the path back had to be near it. Behind me, my friend screamed again. The sound cut off too fast. Like a switch, I didn't look back. I heard something behind me, though, footsteps, but not normal, too light for its size, too fast. Then the voice came again, right behind my ear, perfect and calm. My own voice. "Stop running." My stomach flipped. I stumbled, nearly fell, caught myself on a tree. My injured arm screamed pain. As bark scraped the open cuts, I kept going. The schoolhouse appeared ahead like a miracle, its broken outline against the trees. I sprinted toward it, burst around the corner, and nearly slammed into the wall because my legs were shaking too hard to steer. I fumbled my phone out with numb fingers. No service. I wasn't surprised. I still felt betrayed. I shoved it back and grabbed my car keys, because keys are something solid and real, and my brain needed that. I ran past the schoolhouse back toward the main path toward the entrance. The woods felt different, now too quiet, like everything had stopped to watch. I could hear my own breath, ragged and loud. I could hear my heartbeat. I could hear something else. Two soft, quick steps keeping pace just out of my peripheral vision. I caught a glimpse of movement to my left. A shape behind the trees, not fully visible. Just the suggestion of long limbs and pale skin, and that white dot stare. I ran harder. Burned, my vision tunneled. Tears streaked my face without me realizing I was crying. Then the path opened up, and I saw the parking lot. The car sat where we left it, dull and innocent under the dead light. I hit the driver's side door and yanked. It opened so hard, it almost bounced back. I didn't even close it. I just threw myself inside, slammed the keys into the ignition, and turned. The engine coughed once. Nothing. My blood went cold. I turned again, harder, like force could make it behave. The engine sputtered and caught. I didn't waste a second. I threw it into reverse tires, spitting gravel. As I backed out, I saw it at the edge of. When my wife and I moved from Los Angeles to a small town in Ohio, a little over a year ago, a lot of people asked why we would make such a move. Most people prefer warm, sunny weather, beaches, a vibrant food scene, and the endless entertainment that the LA area provides. Right? Well, there were two main reasons. First, California is an incredibly expensive place to live in, and I do not have the most lucrative career. And second, we managed to find the house of our dreams. Or so I thought. It was almost a decade into our marriage when we finally stopped talking about leaving California and actually considered doing it. It wouldn't be an easy choice for me. I would be leaving behind all of my immediate family on the other side of the country. Plus, I was a born and raised Californian, never having lived anywhere else. I had no idea what it was like starting over in a new, unknown town where we knew absolutely no one. What sealed the deal for me on making the move was when I stumbled across a listing for a house in Ohio that made my heart skip a beat. I had been getting bored looking at page after page of dull listings for dull houses, so I had decided to search for cool, old houses for sale. Both my wife and I had always fantasized about living in a house that looked like somewhere a vampire would live, and that's exactly the vibe this house I found gave off. It was nicknamed the Castle. It wasn't a castle per se, but the architect had given this mansion awesome castle-like features. Built in 1908 for a local lumber baron, the house was a 3-story behemoth whose facade was all beautiful gray stone, although with strange black stains all over the exterior. Probably some weathering or something that had affected the stone over time. Other features included multiple red-tiled roofs of various angles, dormers, finials, columns, several lovely stained glass windows, a turret whose top point reached for the sky above the rest of the house, and a front porch bigger than our garage in California. The photos of the inside were just as impressive. Most of the original woodwork and early 20th century features was clean and intact. Other than the natural wear of time, the place was in good shape. I never thought we would be able to afford a place like this, but my eyes bugged out when I saw the price. There was no way it could be that low. Reading through the rather scant details provided on the listing, it looked like the current owner had been trying to get the property off his hands for decades and had kept lowering and lowering the price. Why hadn't this been snatched up already? I showed my wife the listing, and she booked us a flight to go look at it right then and there, and we left for Ohio that weekend. The moment we saw the house, we immediately fell in love with it. A beautiful foyer had greeted us when we first entered, a humongous green-tiled fireplace dominating the room, set just below the main staircase. As I stood before the enormous fireplace, studying it, it was in that moment that something occurred to me. The main staircase ascended directly over the fireplace. So then how did the chimney work? That was when I learned about what was referred to as a witch's chimney or a witch's crook. The realtor told us how in old houses, the chimney would sometimes have a bend in it, so it could reach the roof when other architectural features were in the way. I asked him what that had to do with witches. He went on to tell us that a piece of folklore had developed due to these types of chimneys. Apparently, they prevented witches from getting into the house because they could only fly in straight lines. If a witch tried to get in, they would get stuck. I had to chuckle a bit at that, but it was an interesting bit of superstition. I thought that witch stuff was more of a New England thing. Anyway, it made me wonder if all the fireplaces in the house had bends in them. Were they still so worried about witches back in the early 1900s? Studying the foyer fireplace, we figured the chimney must have been angled to go backward behind the staircase, so that it could then curve upward and reach the roof. The rest of the house was just as impressive. The west wing held a parlor with a grand piano, and a dining room comprised of dark oak and hand-painted wallpaper. To the east was a library that I drooled over, with bookshelves that almost reached the ceiling, and a reading nook that took up the bottom area of the tower. In the back of the house was a cozy kitchen, with tons of old cabinets and even the original icebox. And all this was just the first floor. We never did meet the owner, only the realtor, who seemed like a twitchy, nervous man. That didn't bother us, as we were focused on the house. We put in an offer the next day. Unsurprisingly, there were no competing offers. We made the move that September, after a tearful goodbye to my family. Me, my wife, and our 2 dogs packed up and hauled everything we owned from California to almost the other side of the entire country. Excitement and terror thrashed inside me in equal measures the entire way. What would our life be like from now on going forward? Unfortunately, we soon found out the castle was in need of more work than we had initially realized. We had fallen for the house so quickly that we hadn't really considered what sort of upkeep a place like this would need. The fact that the castle had been empty for so many years became evident in many ways, like the outdated electrical wiring and ancient plumbing. The thing that confounded me the most, however, was the fact that all of the chimneys had been sealed up with what looked like bad concrete patch jobs. Why? This was Ohio, where the winters could be brutal, so I had been told. It made no sense to cut off a means of heating the house. Well, the chimneys would have to be unsealed eventually. About a week after our arrival, I woke up one night with a sudden start. Looking over at the bedside clock, I saw that it was 2:09 a.m. I wasn't sure what had awakened me until I heard what sounded like scratching. My wife was beside me, snoring softly. She liked to wear earbuds so she could listen to music as she fell asleep, so the sound hadn't roused her. But both dogs were awake, lying between my wife and me on the bed. They stared in the direction of the open bedroom door, deep grumbling emanating from their chests. Upon moving in, we had installed a dog door for them that led into the backyard. Had an animal gotten inside through it? Reluctantly getting out of bed, I grabbed my phone and turned on its light before heading out into the hallway. I kept hearing the scratching sound. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from a different room or from inside the walls. Sometimes it sounded like it was in front of me, and other times behind me. I never could pinpoint the direction it came from. I went down to the first floor to look around, but the scratching had stopped by then, and I found nothing. Despite a sense of unease in the pit of my stomach, I went back to bed. I don't know how much I slept that night, since my brain kept me on alert in case the sound resumed, or in case a rabid raccoon decided to pounce on me. Over the next 2 weeks, I heard that scratching on and off during the night. Each time it woke me up at 2:09 a.m. Sitting up, I would always find the dogs staring out of the bedroom door, making their deep, angry growls. October arrived faster than I had anticipated. The weather grew chilly, and the leaves turned from green into all sorts of reds and yellows. It was beautiful to see. I had never experienced a Midwestern fall, but I'd heard stories. I just didn't know if my Californian biology was ready. I decided it was time to unseal the chimneys, so we were prepared in case the old furnace pooped out during the cold weather. We started with the main one in the foyer. We had hired Jared, a handyman, a week prior to help us with the ongoing work on the castle. To be honest, my wife and I were not the most knowledgeable about house repair, so Jared became a huge help. We hired him because he had been the only person out of all the handymen we called who had been willing to come. Everyone else made excuses about being busy after I gave them our address. Looking back, it was weird, but at the time, I was so distracted with working on the house, I didn't dwell on it. The first weekend of October, I asked Jared if he could unseal the foyer fireplace. His expression grew. Grim for some reason, but he assured me he could do it. After grabbing a hammer and chisel from his truck, Jared set about breaking through the concrete seal. I left him to it and went upstairs to where I set up my office to work on a few things. The idea of my wife and I, cuddling on a comfy couch before a big roaring fire in that gorgeous fireplace, had put me in a good mood. It wasn't even 20 minutes later when I heard a heavy thud from downstairs, followed by loud cursing. The dogs, who had been sleeping at my feet, both jumped up and began barking like maniacs. As I rushed out of my office and reached the stairs, the most horrid smell I'd ever had the misfortune to inhale assaulted my nostrils. I had to pull my shirt up over my nose, and my vision blurred as my eyes watered. Downstairs, I saw that Jared had broken through the chimney's seal, the concrete lying in pieces on the fireplace floor. The dogs ran over to the edge of the hearth, the fur on their backs puffed up, and barked their fool heads off. I couldn't get them to quiet down, so I locked them in a bathroom, all the while trying to keep my nose and mouth covered. Not that it was really helping. Once the dog's noise was contained, I asked Jared what was going on. He stood on the threshold of the front door, gagging and spitting. He told me how he had worked on many houses over his career and had found his fair share of dead animals. but none of them had been as rancid as the smell that was coming out of that fireplace. With the flashlight from my phone, I knelt into the fireplace and looked up inside the chimney. The stench was hellish. A yawning black hole greeted me. There really wasn't much else to see. Besides scorched brickwork that went upward several feet before a 45-degree angle took the rest of the chimney duct out of sight and into a darkness that seemed to swallow my light. I proceeded to open all the first-floor windows and doors in an attempt to vent that putrid odor. It hadn't dissipated much when my wife got home an hour later. She was nearly knocked off her feet as she walked inside, and the reek smacked her in the face. Jared called Pete, a chimney sweep friend of his, since the fireplace would need a good cleaning before it could be safely used, and he could get rid of whatever dead animal was stinking up the place. He stepped outside onto the front porch to make the call. Through the open door, I heard what sounded like a heated whispered conversation he was having on the phone that seemed to switch between arguing and pleading. After coming back in, he let me know that the chimney sweep would be coming by the next day. By the time I went to bed that night, the smell had lessened somewhat. As my eyes grew heavy, I noticed that the dogs were still awake and alert, their ears perked up as if listening for something. I didn't hear anything, so I figured there must have been something out in the yard drawing their attention. I woke up in the middle of the night, like I had several times before, at 2:09. This time it wasn't because of any scratching. The dogs were still awake, their ears perked. Had they slept at all? That was when I noticed how cold it was. The house was like a freezer. Maybe a door or window had been left open downstairs from when I was trying to get rid of the stink. I went downstairs to check everything out. Everything was shut tight. The weirdest thing, though, was that it was coldest right in front of the foyer fireplace. Another problem that needed fixing. Pete the chimney sweep came the next morning. He brought with him enough ladders to make his way to the top of the house, as well as one of those cameras attached to the end of a long cable, so he could see what was in there and how far down it was. I asked if he needed any help since Jared wasn't there that day. He said he was fine, so I went back inside where I had been arranging stuff in the kitchen cupboards. I hadn't even put 2 plates away when I heard a yell, and a split second later, I saw Pete plummet past the kitchen window. The sound of his body smacking against the ground is something I'll never forget. I rushed outside with my wife right behind me. Pete was conscious, though not responding to anything I was saying. As my wife called 911, I kept trying to talk to him in an attempt to keep him awake. A red puddle formed in the grass around his head. The emergency responders arrived in no time and took Pete away in an ambulance. As they were loading him in, the man looked at me and started to mumble something. I stepped over to his side, but the only thing I managed to make out from his hoarse whispers were the words eyes and hair. My wife was shaken by the experience, and I couldn't blame her. So was I down to my core. Later that day, when one of Pete's coworkers came to collect his truck and equipment, we learned that the poor man hadn't made it. The doctors had done everything they could, but Pete's head injury had been too severe, and he had passed away. I couldn't sleep that night, instead sitting up in bed and looking at my phone. I was trying to distract myself. The image of Pete lying on the ground in a pool of blood was burned into my brain. I had never seen something like that happen before in real life. A heavy rock had formed in my stomach, making me feel nauseous every time I thought about the incident. Needing a glass of water, I headed downstairs, but as soon as I stepped off the last step and turned on the foyer light, a frigid wind swept over me from the direction of the fireplace. I spun around and stared. What I expected to see, I don't know. The chandelier needed some better bulbs, because they couldn't illuminate the inside of the fireplace, leaving shadows so thick I could have sworn they were solid. With slow steps, I moved closer until my toes almost touched the green tile of the hearth. My phone was upstairs. I berated myself for leaving it in bed. As I stood there, trying to see into the shadows of the fireplace, I felt myself shivering. Cold air came out from that darkness in puffs. There was a sort of rhythm to it, I realized. I stepped onto the hearth and knelt down, leaning closer and squinting in the dim light. Either my eyes were playing tricks on me, or there was a subtle movement in those fireplace shadows, like the blackness was actually some viscous liquid. Something compelled me to reach out my hand. I can't say what exactly. The cold air that was coming out of the chimney had seeped down into my bones, and I shivered even more. I was about to stick my shaking hand inside the fireplace when a sudden noise on either side of me caught my attention and brought me to my senses. The dogs had come down, and both of them were staring straight into the fireplace as well, growling loudly. I got back to my feet, and we hurried back upstairs, the three of us getting back into bed. Still shivering, I got under the covers to warm up and checked my phone. The clock display rolled over from 2:09 to 2:10. Our town has a historical society, so I went there the next day to see if they had any information on the house. I had no idea what kind of information I was looking for, but I needed to know more about our new home. Unfortunately, when I got there, the lady at the front desk told me how there had been a fire in the 70s that had destroyed a large portion of the Historical Society's records. Disheartened but determined, I asked her if she could look to see if there was anything on my house. The moment I told her my address, I watched as the smile disappeared from her face. The castle was well known in town, she told me, which was no surprise. All older documents relating to the castle had been lost in the fire, but she could tell me the basic history of the house, which had become something of a local legend by this time. It had been built in 1908 for a lumber baron by the name of Joseph Murray, who had moved in with his wife Margaret, two young sons, Matthew and Daniel, and Joseph's elderly mother Enid. They lived happily in the castle for about 5 years until one night, according to Joseph's later statement to the police, he woke up in the middle of the night, hearing the grandfather clock in the foyer chime 2 o'clock. He had tried to get back to sleep, but noted a frigid temperature in the room, accompanied by what smelled like rotten meat. About 10 minutes later, he was startled by sudden shrieking. That night, Daniel and his grandmother Enid had disappeared from the house. No trace of them was ever found. The second son, Matthew Murray, inherited the house in 1926 after his father passed away. His mother had died a few years earlier. He had married a woman named Lily Abner that same year, honeymooning in Paris. The very day they came back, however, tragedy again struck the Murrays. Matthew would go on to tell the authorities that he awoke that night a little after 2 o'clock in the morning. The room was like an icebox with a putrid odor hanging in the air. He noticed that Lily was not beside him in bed. That was when the hellish screaming began. Leaping out of bed, Matthew rushed downstairs, but according to his account, as soon as he set foot in the foyer, the screaming abruptly stopped. Lily was nowhere in the house, and despite efforts by local police and the community, she was never seen again. For years, Matthew lived alone in the house, his mind fractured, so the townspeople said. He refused to leave the house or sell it. He refused to believe Lily had simply left him and moved elsewhere. On a warm July night in 1938, neighbors heard the sound of gunfire at around 2 o'clock in the morning. When police came to investigate, they found no one in the castle. Long, coarse hairs and some blood splatter on the hearth of the foyer fireplace were the only things out of place in the entire house. Explanations for the blood and hair ranged from crazed maniacs and rabid animals to more fantastical things like monstrous beasts and evil spirits. Matthew never reappeared. As I left the Historical Society, I wondered what I was supposed to do with this information. It was obvious to me now why the castle had been so cheap, and why nobody had snatched it up. But how much was true, and how much was just town folklore? I didn't say anything about the story to my wife. There was no point in worrying her. Not until I figured out what I needed to do. I'm never going to forgive myself for not taking things seriously and getting us out of that house as soon as possible. That night, I awoke once more to the sound of scratching coming from seemingly nowhere and everywhere. Grabbing my phone, I saw that it was 2:09 in the morning, as I had come to expect by that time. It was at that moment that I heard my wife start screaming. I had never heard her scream before, but I knew it was her. She wasn't in bed beside me, and neither were the dogs. I could hear their furious barking, mixed in with the shrieking, and I exploded out of bed, sprinting down to the first floor. The entire house was like a freezer with a familiar stench thick in the air. As soon as I reached the foyer, I hit the light switch. When the lights came on, I caught a brief glimpse of something dark retracting up into the chimney. Just a small black blur of motion, the dogs barking after it. Had it been a foot? A hand? I don't know. Whatever it was, it left behind a clump of dark, greasy hair that smelled rancid. It was not my wife's hair. The dogs refused to even sniff it. I searched the entire house while I waited for the cops, the dogs at my side, but I couldn't find my wife anywhere. Neither could the police. 5 officers combed the entire property, finding nothing. It's been over a week now. The police have made no progress in finding my wife. I don't want to lose hope, but the guilt and fear and desperation are crushing me. Every night at 2:09, I sit in front of the fireplace, waiting for something to happen, though I don't know what I'm expecting. I would do anything to get my wife back, but what can I do? Every night at 2:09, the house grows cold. That rotten smell flows out of the fireplace to fill every room, and I hear scratching. There's something new, though. Along with the scratching, I've been hearing a faint sound coming from up inside the foyer fireplace. I swear what I hear is whispering, though I can't make out any words. Sometimes there's also what I believe to be quiet laughing. It could be my imagination, or not. I'm writing this down because I feel like I'm going crazy, and so there is a record of events. Last night, when I went down to sit in front of the fireplace, I found my wife's wedding ring on the hearth. A lock of those dirty, disgusting hairs were tied around it. I'm thinking of climbing up into the chimney. I have to, even though I'm afraid of what I'll find. I'm at war with my neighbor. I live in Appalachia. I've always lived here. I've always been aware of the Haints that are my neighbors. They are aware of me too. When I was young, they used to terrify me. Eyes within the trees, whispers that sound like human voices mixed with the howling winds. When the birds go silent, you become acutely aware of the fact you are trespassing on your neighbor's property, and you are not welcome. Unlike people, Haints don't use guns to defend themselves. As I grew older, I grew a deep appreciation for them. This has been their home much longer than it has been mine. The Appalachian Mountains are older than we can dream of, older than bones and even the sea. When you're quiet and still, you can speak to the bones. The ground itself talks in a voice with no sound, communicating to your soul, not your conscious mind. When I first bought my own property with my husband, I made it clear to the Haints I was going to inhabit this property as it was my own. I gave them gifts of milk and sugar, woven baskets, and carved charms, set with the intentions and phrases my mama taught, passed down from the 10 generations my family had lived here. Then I set my wards. Nails taken from the corner boards of my house, salted and blessed with my own blood. My husband isn't from here originally, so he thought it was a bit of an extreme response, but he didn't protest. He declined my offers to add him to the wards. I wasn't pleased with that. I'd no intention of forcing him, though. He didn't believe my stories for the first year. It wasn't until the things in our house would go missing, only to be shortly returned after I served up honey milk to the haint living with us, that he started to believe. He never confirmed it aloud, but the change in his disposition was clear. He began to fear the things in the woods. I told him time and time again there was no fear to be had as long as we respected them the same they respected us. Yet he still refused to be out past sundown. We no longer hosted bonfires or watched the fireflies after the trout-bellied sky sank beneath the horizon. I understood the fear he held. The paralysis of realizing you are being watched cautiously by things beyond your comprehension. The apex predator is aware you are stepping on its territory, and it may pounce at any moment. It wasn't until the screams started that I became nervous as well. I'd heard the screams before, almost woman-like, yet oddly inhuman. It had been many years since I'd felt the dread they inspired, the need to flee. My husband froze, still as a rabbit on its haunches, waiting to see what the hound will do. I guided his arm inside and locked the door, salting the windows and door. I was confident in my wards, but that did not mean I was somehow stronger than whatever this was. As far as I knew, the wards could be completely useless. The haints run by their own rules. The words of my father from childhood stuck in my head. That ain't how a woman screams. Go inside. He said it with such a serious face, as if he was warning me, not just keeping me away from a fox or a mountain lion. When we heard the deer screaming in agony 2 days later, his eyes darkened, and he turned his back to the woods with resolve. He kept the shotgun by the door for a month after that. Something I was now doing too. We lived that way for 6 months. This haint, unwilling to live amicably with me like so many others, terrorized my husband the most. He woke up screaming most nights, some night terror breaking his mind slowly but surely. I was beginning to grow angry. I had made good faith offerings, burnt meat in a fire just outside my bounds, honey bread and homemade meads, yet the haint accepted none of it. All was spoiled and rotten by morning, a rude rejection and a statement to me. It only stoked the flames in my own soul. This was my home just as it was the haint's, and I would not allow it to terrorize my loved one. It began killing my chickens. That was when I decided it was war. I responded in earnest, upping my wards tenfold, saying nightly prayers, calling upon the friendly neighbors for aid. I did not like calling upon them. It always came at a cost. I was growing more rapidly aware of the fact that if I did not, this haint would kill us. It was not content to only feed off the discomfort. It craved the taste of flesh. My chickens were not a satisfactory substitute. I saw it for the first time 3 years into us living here. It stood at the edge of my wards, careful not to step over them, yet seemingly testing the bounds. Its appearance is difficult to describe, but I will do my best. Deer are prey animals. Their eyes are set on the side of their heads to give them near complete 360-degree vision. Their legs are made for running and hold immense ability to spring into jumps over creek beds or brush as they escape hunters. This beast did not hold those features. Its eyes were front set, pitch black with absolutely no glint as the porch light hit them. It stood taller at the shoulder than a normal deer. Nearly as tall as the willow it towered near. Its mouth was wrong, slitted and barely masking the shape of sharpened teeth. It moved its head like a cat, cocked its head to the side like a dog, chittered like a fox, stepped like a mountain lion. What I found most uncanny were its legs. They were not the slender, graceful legs of a deer. They were muscular, the legs of a predator, not prey. It pawed the ground with a ferocity that spoke to its power, one I did not want to cross. The antlers upon its head were sharper than nature intended, the shedded velvet coated with dried blood. I suppose this could have meant it sheds its antlers, like a normal deer, but deep in my bones, I knew they were attached to its skull like horns. I did something then that many would consider stupid. My husband was deep asleep, tired after a day's work and exhausted from the ongoing torment. So as quietly as I could, I slipped out the back door and walked to it. It seemed surprised I had chosen this route. It took several steps back, cautiously watching my hands as if I were going to pull a revolver and silver bullets from my pockets. I did not. I held the leftover pork from that night's meal. I placed it upon the ground and pushed it with a branch across the ward lines. It regarded me with interest, unsure of what my motive was. For the first time, it bowed its head and ate. I took it as a sign of truce, at least in that moment. I spoke to it, introduced myself, my lineage, introduced it to the bones of my kin, who now walk the deep earth of the mountain, same as the Haints. I asked it as simply as possible, "What do you seek out of this?" Its head shifted and clicked, the teeth in its mouth showing as if it was grinning. "I want him." The words took me aback. My husband. The outsider who had done no conceivable harm to anything here, who had been respectful as I told him to be, who'd followed every rule. Why? I did not bother to hide the shock or animosity in my voice. How well do you truly know the man you have bound yourself to? How much do you know of his history, of the path his kin have passed to him? How confident are you that man is a good one? You will find me when you decide. That is, if it is not too late. The voice that spoke to me did not come from vocal cords. It traveled up my spine, a voice of the grave dirt beneath my feet, seeking revenge of ages. It regarded me one final time before its shadowy form sank into the darkest part of the tree line. I chewed on its words for several days, told myself that it was meaning to make me paranoid, distrustful of my husband. If that was the intent, it was working. I could not hope to view him the same way. I watched his every move and reconsidered everything he told me. I watched as he snapped at me over small things, something I'd once blamed on the Haint tormenting us. I re-examined the ways he drank, unable to sleep or feel much without it. I considered the way he chopped wood as if it had done something to him, an intense anger just underneath the surface. I listened to the words he spoke in his sleep, realizing they were not words in response to a Haint, but someone from his past. I began to wonder if the Haint was his reckoning. I spent a month pondering what to do. I sat by my ward lines night after night, waiting for the Haint to speak to me once again. It never came. I could hear it, feel it just beyond the capabilities of my sight, even felt as if I made eye contact with it a few times. He's starting to become paranoid of me as well. I feel his eyes upon me when my back is turned. I see the way his knuckles go white as he grasps knives at dinner time. I see the way his jaw tightens when I speak. I'm beginning to wonder if I've been fighting the wrong war. If the isolation I once considered sanctuary will become my grave. I broke my ward last night. It was on pure impulse. My mama would scold me if she could see the way I went about it. Dug it up under the cover of night and felt the cold wash of the surrounding neighbors overtake me. I heard the sounds of the stag chittering with that fox-like voice. Then I went to bed. I do not know how long I have until this war ends. I do not know which side I am on. All I know is I clutch my protection necklace much more tightly, and I no longer sleep at night. I watch and whisper to the Haints I call my neighbors. Title: The Night Watch. Ethan Walker was assigned to night duty at Watch Post 7, a forgotten military checkpoint far from the main base, surrounded by dead trees, broken wire fences, and old concrete towers, the kind of place soldiers avoided talking about. During the day, everything seemed normal, but at night the silence became heavy and uncomfortable, as if the darkness itself was listening on. Ethan first shift, he stood alone holding his rifle, watching the empty road when he heard slow footsteps. Coming from behind the watchtower, he turned quickly, but saw nothing, only the sound continued moving in circles. Around him, steady, calm, deliberate. He called out, asking who was there, but the sound stopped, instantly replaced by a low whisper too. Unclear to understand, yet close enough to make his skin crawl. The following night, the same thing happened, but worse. Shadows moved between the trees, even when the wind was still, and the moon was bright. Ethan felt breathing near his neck and heard his name spoken softly, as if by someone who knew him night after night. The phenomena repeated only during his shifts: whispers, cries, footsteps, metal scraping against metal, and sometimes distant screaming that seemed to rise from the ground itself. Unable to bear it any more, Ethan told his fellow soldiers, Mark Lewis, Ryan Cooper, Noah Brooks, and Daniel Harris. To his shock, they all admitted experiencing the same things. Mark saw figures standing near the gate. Ryan heard voices begging for help. Noah swore he felt hands grabbing his legs from beneath the watchtower. Then an older soldier named Victor Hale finally spoke, revealing the truth. Years ago, Watch Post 7 was the site of a brutal ambush. Dozens of soldiers were killed there, trapped, burned, shot, and left to die. Their bodies were never recovered, and the place was quietly reused without ever being cleansed. That final night, Ethan returned to duty, determined to survive. The fog rolled in thick, and unnatural, cutting visibility to almost nothing. The temperature dropped suddenly, and shadows began to surround him, moving independently, whispering louder, repeating the same sentence over and over. You are standing where we died. You are standing where we died. The ground beneath his feet vibrated as screams filled the air, and dark figures emerged from the fog, their faces twisted in pain, reaching for him, accusing him, replacing them. Ethan felt icy hands grip his arms and shoulders, voices shouting, "Stay with us, stay where we stayed." He fired his weapon, blindly screaming until the magazine emptied, and he collapsed. At sunrise, soldiers found him sitting against the watchtower, eyes wide, mouth open, unable to speak. Watch Post 7 was permanently closed, but guards stationed nearby still report hearing footsteps, whispers, and screams every night, waiting for the next soldier to take the watch.